Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eggs, the podcast. Today's special guest is Alex Levin. He is the co-founder and CEO at Regal. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm great.
Absolutely. Thrilled to death to have you. Thanks for making time for us.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, your background? I noticed you're a CEO of a company. That's a pretty big deal. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So I grew up on the East Coast. My parents told me I could go to college anywhere, but, they'd only pay for it if it was on the East Coast. So, I stayed on the East Coast. And I think, in school, I studied philosophy and psychology, and for a while thought I'd be an academic, but realized, I didn't want sort of that isolated a career. And at some point figured out that every company in the future would be a technology company. This was kind of the software is eating the world period, if you think back to those days. And went and, became a product manager at some early, technology companies, loved it, had a great time, particularly liked early stage companies where every day you walked in, there was something new, every rock you overturned, there was an opportunity. And, was at a couple different startups. The last one before this, both my co-founder and I were both there, but we started when it was about $1 million in revenue, and the end was about $1.5 billion in revenue. So I got to see a lot of different stages of growth, which was fun and interesting, but ultimately decided, that one we worked for the founders. Like, we didn't want to do that again. Like, if we were going to go to a new company, we wanted it to be our idea. We wanted to be the founders. Ultimately we wanted to be the deciders, so to speak, set the standards. And, luckily we had this experience in that business, which is in the home services business, where we how little how little people respected their contact center, if I want to put it that way. Basically, everybody viewed contact centers as a cost center and said, hey, we don't want to talk to customers. Like, we're going to deflect customer inbound, not bother engaging with them because that's just a cost center of the business. And structurally, my co-founder and I believe that was wrong. We believe that low touch model only led to decreasing returns. And actually, in a lot of businesses, there was a much higher touch model that could be used for engaging customers. And you could do it in a way that was still very cost effective while you were driving, better customer experience, more revenue, better customer outcomes. So that's where Regal came out of, was this desire to sort of improve how contact centers were being used. Specifically, what we do is look at aggregating all the first party customer data you have. So we match your data model and understand what the customer is doing and use that so that in your contact center, whether somebody calls in or you're proactively engaging someone, you're reaching the right customer at the right time, the right conversation to drive, better outcomes. So in healthcare, it might be better healthcare outcome. In insurance, it might be getting somebody to get an insurance policy. If you're selling a home, it might be get somebody to buy a home. So it depends on the industry, exactly what you're optimizing for. But that's sort of the journey. And, now obviously we're 4 years into Regal, and, it's been fun to be to your point, a CEO. There's good days and bad days, but overall it's been good.
Great. Well, let's have you actually take kind of a step backwards, and let's talk a little bit about sort of just what Regal is. So I think for a lot of people, you're talking about contact centers, things like that. I feel like this might be sophisticated for a lot of people who are, small businesses, young entrepreneurs, people who are just trying to get into it. So let's first maybe talk about the problem you were going to solve kind of at length, and then why Regal is the solution for it.
Sure. So, in more detail, the last business is called Angie. We own Angie's List, Home Advisor, Handy, all the big home services brands. And specifically, our original hypothesis was, hey, they're old school home services providers where you have to talk with a human being. No one wants to do that anymore. Let's bring it all on the internet. Just like, type in, I want a handyman at 2 p.m. and, there's a price and go. And what we found is we were very good at getting attention. Like, people would come to our sites and be interested in that. But we were actually much worse at getting somebody to buy the actual service. So what I mean is, if we got a lead and an old school, like paper and pencil, person got a lead, we converted the lead less, if that makes sense. So that was we racked our brains for a long time and said, why are we worse at converting leads? Like, we thought we're these fancy technology people that made all these nice self-serve experiences. Isn't that better than talking to a human being? Turns out, no. Turns out that when we started actually respecting customers and saying, oh, like, you own a home, you want a fence, tell us more, that was a critical part to building enough trust to get the person to actually give us the right information, to make the right quote, to get the person to buy the service. So it wasn't, the winning model wasn't self-serve only, it was self-serve plus that personal touch. And so the challenge was, we had a big contact center. We had a 3,000 person contact center. we actually went to our software provider. We use different ones over time, but Nice in Contact, Genesis, talked to us, said, hey guys, your software is telling us not to ever talk to customers, but that's wrong. For our business, it's important to talk to customers. Help us. And we were probably a $30 million a year customer, so not peanuts. Like, we were a meaningful customer for them. And they told us to pound sand. They said, guys, you're wrong.
Wow.
Customers don't want to talk to you. Voice is dying. Go away. Like, we know what we're doing. And so one of your bigger customers is telling you this, and your approach is pound sand. Thanks. So we built some custom things internally on top of our contact center to start doing more personalization. But ultimately, it wasn't our business. It wasn't what we were going to focus on. We were always pulling people off to do other things. And so that's where, the sort of realization of there could be a better way came from. And we started, my co-founder and I started looking at, are there other business, is this just an A&G Home Services thing, or are there other businesses where this could be the case? And what we discovered is a lot of the first businesses that came online were retail businesses, pencils, clothes, whatever. It's not that complicated. If customer service is bad, nobody cares. But everybody who shops online now expects the rest of their life online. Healthcare, education, insurance, lending, more complicated things. And those low-touch models that don't really hurt that much when you fail in retail really cause problems when you fail in life insurance, right? You're trying to get somebody life insurance and you mess that up. It's not like, oops, return. It's like, shit, I have the wrong life insurance policy. I died and my kids are not getting that money. So it is material to get this right. So what we found is it was the perfect time to really go and rethink what a contact center was like. And so we focus on these more considered industries, these higher touch industries that are coming online now very quickly. And we help them, from the beginning, rethink what they need, particularly what they told us. And what we've built is, one, I need to know what the customer is. And or who the customer is. That sounds obvious, but historically in contact centers, I don't know, somebody emailed in, somebody called in, it was treated all the same. Literally, they treat everyone the same. So that's because they don't have any customer email. So in Regal, the core is we know, what do you do on the website? What do you do on email? What was the last conversation you had? We have all that information. Two is we have a whole system of automation that allows you to, in a very sophisticated way, route inbound to different people or in different ways. Route the outbound, to be much smarter. Should you text? Should you call? What should the message be? When should you do it? So that sort of automation sort of takes over instead of having a human being making the decision of what should I say or who should I call next or should I text or email. The system is doing that, which is obviously going to be better at scale. And, as part of that, we've introduced into contact centers concepts like personalization, like A/B testing, which allow them to massively improve what they're doing. And ultimately, I'd say, now one of the big transitions we can talk about is actually bringing AI agents into the mix instead of just human agents. So that's pretty fascinating, where we have a lot of teams that have AI agents and human agents working side by side to better serve customer need. So ultimately, though, our goal is, if you're one of these businesses, like, you shouldn't be relegated to sort of the low touch deflection model. You should have a tool like Regal that is still cost effective for you, but allows you to be very high touch online and drive better customer outcomes.
So essentially, you're a third party customer service.
Well, we're the software. Yeah.
Okay.
So the category is called contact center software or CCaaS. The legacy providers are tools like, TalkDesk, Nice in Contact, Genesis, Five9. Those are some of they've been here 30 years. Their big value prop is, I don't know, they're in the cloud. Like,
Sure.
they haven't made big improvements over the last 30 years. We're sort of a new iteration, a new generation of contact center software. So all the agents in the contact center sit in Regal. All the managers use Regal. All the business people use Regal, and they use it to try to drive, a customer experience that's really going to lead to a better, outcome for that customer.
So I'm a real estate broker. I've got 7 agents underneath me. I've got a receptionist, and I've got a crew of people that are out doing door knocking, whatever, just example type thing. I come to you and say, hey, I want to get my website powered by your service. What's the steps? How does it yeah.
Yeah, so largely, we go after mid-size and larger businesses. So a lot of the concepts that we talk about can be applied to smaller businesses, but we really don't work with the smaller businesses.
Okay.
So, perhaps I don't know, a life insurance company with 100 agents will come to us and say, all the agents are doing whatever they want to do. How do we make it so that, the outcomes are better for customers? And we'll help them move their agents from their current phone system to Regal. We'll get all the data from their current website, flowing into Regal, from their current email system flowing into Regal, and we'll start, transcribing, recording all of their conversations, using that to build customer profiles. So the point is, if the customer on the phone says they're high intent and looking at three competitors, the next text, the next conversation can be specifically about the competitors, and you could make sure to remind the agent to have that call because they're a high intent customer. Versus if the AI dictates that it's a very low intent customer, perhaps we're just texting them and leaving them alone, and we're not engaging with them as much because we know that they're not worth spending our time on. So we can be much more educated about it. To what I said, small businesses can use similar concepts, and there are tools that are simpler to use in certain industries, like in local services or restaurants or whatever. We tend to not serve small businesses as much because they don't want to invest the time and effort into really the type of sophistication that we offer. Also, like in big businesses, they will obsess over, do I send a text message one day after you told me you wanted me, or 2 days? And that 1% difference is a real difference in revenue at big scale. If you're a small business, 1 day, 2 days, it doesn't make as much difference. So you're not going to invest as much in that optimization.
That was like the last date I went on.
No, and we do not work for any dating businesses, so I do not know the best way to follow up with is it winky face, smiley face, hi? Like, I don't know.
So I've heard a lot of things about you hear a lot of software companies like yours that are actually at too big of scale for a lot of people. And it's too sophisticated, it's too much, and like you're saying, it's difficult to actually measure any kind of real movement. But for people who are trying to grow in that direction, can we maybe even take a step further back and just maybe talk about sort of your experience, maybe pre-Regal even, but in terms of building up a system inside your company that would make sense for a smaller business that might eventually dovetail them into becoming a Regal customer?
Oh, for sure. So when I was hired for Angie, this home services business, I'd never run contact centers before. At the time, we were a relatively small business. And one of the co-founders basically goes, here, this is yours. And for 90 days, I think I worked every day sitting there in the contact center, trying to figure out what was going on, what were we doing, what do customers want. For every one booking, fence installation, we had 4 customer interactions. And it was insane. The phone was always off the hook. We were never answered. It was terrible. And so I think one of the first things I would suggest is, if you're a small business, really start understanding how you are interacting with a customer. What is a typical customer journey? How are they finding you? What channel did they come from? Are they coming to your website? Are they coming to a phone number? So how are they finding you? What services do they want? What products do they want? What are their objections? How many times are you interacting with them before they buy? How many times do you interact with them after you buy? And what are the typical interactions? So I started introducing concepts like, hey, after each call, let's disposition it and know what the call was about. They wanted to reschedule, or they wanted to change the service order, or whatever, they had a problem, whatever it was. So you start understanding. Then you take a big step back and you go, okay, now I understand the life cycle of that customer and what's going on. And you have to start making decisions about where, as a small business owner, you want to invest your time, because that is your most valuable resource. So, do you want to invest your time in improving the current flow, right? The operations? Do you want to invest your time in improving margin? Do you want to invest your time in improving growth? Depending on what you're optimizing for and what your current setup is, you have to make decisions about prioritization. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see in small businesses is not measuring and understanding what's going on. And the number 2 is not doing a good job of actively, intentionally prioritizing time. And that leads to, running around like a chicken with my head cut off disease, or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of small business owners kind of like that feeling, where they're just always on the edge of the seat, but you're never going to become a bigger business if you're operating always just sort of, by the seat of your pants. So I think starting to be intentional is important, and setting yourself, guidelines. Hey, I'm in this business, as long as my margin is 50%, and as long as there's only 3 operational errors a week, I'm not going to look at that stuff. Somebody else is going to do it, and I'm going to focus on growth, for instance. Okay, in growth, what do I need to prove out? So do little tests. So everything in your head, think of it as a test. I'm going to spend $1,000 to try to get 10 new customers in using flyers. And if it works, then I want to do more flyers. If it doesn't work, I'm going to stop. I want to spend, $20,000 this quarter on Google and see if I can get X number of new customers. If it works, great. Maybe I can hire somebody to do it full time. and I go and do the next thing. But that sort of process of prioritizing and then creating tests and then iterating on it is critical. I think slowly you start finding things that work. And one of the hardest parts of being a small business owner is that transition from you doing it to giving it to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
Because when you were doing it, you're a little, more invested because it's your business, and like you're obsessive over it and you're detail oriented and you constantly on top of it. Now you need to turn into something that can be a process that somebody else who is not as invested and doesn't care as much as you can go and do on a repeatable basis without messing it up. And you need some way of knowing, are they doing it right or wrong? So that process as a business owner starting to transition things is critical. And now you have a team. And now you're a whole different style of business owner. Instead of you doing everything, you manage people that do it, when it requires a different set of skills. So I think that transition as a business owner is a very common one. And I think different people have challenges with different pieces of it. And you just have to be very honest with yourself about where you're strong, where you're weak, where something starts breaking, pause and go, well, I'm shitty at managing people. Like, how am I going to go learn about this, figure out how to do it better? Because without that, you're never going to get to the next step as a business owner.
Yeah. Yeah. So is Regal
Is
the
Regal
pipeline
the
as
pipeline
well?
as
Is that
well?
like
Is that like
supposed to take
supposed to
over
take
the
over the
existing software?
existing software?
Yeah. So for a lot of businesses, they either have like a home built CRM or they use Salesforce or they have nothing. Like all of those sort of prospects come into Regal. We can work alongside of their current CRM, which we often do, or Regal can become the CRM. We don't like pressure people either way. It depends on how people want their setup. I will say in the long run, I think Regal will become sort of the default tool for the end-to-end experience and people won't use the CRM, because I think in the long run, marketing and sales and support and retention, it's all different flavors of the same thing. And it works better if it's all coming from one system that understands all the pieces than if it's, siloed into 4 different systems where you're not sort of understanding what each of the different sort of people are doing.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I wanted to maybe pivot our conversation a little bit and just talk about your life as an entrepreneur. And, making the decision to leave basically a steady paycheck and moving into doing something on your own. Both as entrepreneurs, Mike and I have experienced that. And I wanted to talk to you about just sort of, first of all, deciding to make that decision that you no longer wanted to be owned and working for somebody. You wanted to be doing this on your own. But then also talk about some of the challenges and things that came along with trying to build this company. I mean, and more tactically, in terms of how you build the business, not so much like what the product does or whatever. If that makes sense.
I understand. I think my co-founder and I both sort of decided in our careers we liked this sort of stage startup, and we liked sort of the venture-backed model where you raise money and use it to attract better talent, grow faster, burn money up front to build bigger businesses. And so we kind of like that world. In terms of becoming our own boss, I'd say part of it was, we worked for founders that we admired. And so sort of saw that and said, that's something interesting. Like we'd kind of like that model. So I think you have to have mentors in this world where you sort of like what they're doing and you want to sort of copy them, or we did at least. And then when it came to the decision of like, do we want to, what do we want to do next? The choice was really like, go work for another founder or, be the founder. Like we were at that point in our career. And between that, like it just really was hard for us to convince ourselves that it made sense to go work for somebody else again. Because often like we'd meet these founders and we'd know more than them about these businesses, or we had done, we felt like we were going to contribute more than them. And it was like the equation didn't make sense. Why would we go somewhere where we're going to contribute more and not be the owner of the business and not make the final decision? So some of it kind of, we got there by default. I think some of it is ego. Like I think, both of us have throughout our lives, like gone to top schools and done good work. And some of it is ego of like, you want to prove that you can do it for sure. And then some of it I think is like, really having a problem or something that you want to solve or you believe very deeply in. So for us, ultimately, this contact center problem was very real for us. We had been the ones running the contact. We had been the buyers. Like we really felt that pain, and we felt like something needed to exist that did this. All the current providers said we were crazy. Other people weren't interested in it. And so like, if we didn't do it, it felt like it wouldn't happen. And so, you have to like be in those moments where you go like, we need this thing to exist and we're going to be the ones that do it no matter what. Because if you don't have that level of belief, like, don't go do this. Like often the way I put this in sort of VC funded businesses is I say, go out and spend 2 or 3 months in this business and convince yourself that it's a good business first before you go raise money. The mistake a lot of people make is they go, oh, I have an idea, I'm going to go raise money. And then they start investigating the business. And I'm like, well, you may find out you don't believe in this business and you just raise money and you're stuck for 2 years. So don't do that. So you have to really believe that this thing has to exist, because there are going to be some downs. And in those downs, if you don't really believe, it's going to suck. Also, like, you're going to have to say the same thing every day for the next 10 years of your life. Literally, everybody's going to ask you, what do you do? Why do you do it? Oh, you're going to have to explain this to every new employee, to every new customer. If you're not passionate about it, you're going to get bored as hell going and doing that again and again. So for all those reasons, like, I think you have to have the right motivation. Ultimately, then, the big step that we took is not only did my co-founder and I individually want to be founders, but we wanted to be founders together. Like, we found the person that we wanted to work with who had complementary skill sets that would make us more successful. Look, you can do anything alone, of course, but I think it's really hard to do it alone because you don't have that person you can go to and bounce things off of. So I highly encourage people to find a co-founder or 2 co-founders, even not more than that. More becomes unwieldy, to make sure that you have somebody you're going through this with. And then you're off into the races. You have something you really believe in. You have a person you're doing with it, and you go at it. But, that's it's not for everybody. Like, the mistakes people make is they think they don't want to work for somebody else. They have the ego and they go and do it with, raise money. That's a mistake, because they skip do they really believe something has to exist that doesn't exist? And, are they going to go through walls to make this thing happen no matter what, because they really believe in the idea and it's a good idea? And because they skip that, now they're in a position where they don't really love the business and they don't know what to do. So I think you have to be very careful before becoming a founder.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate the notion of calling this ego, not just passion. And I haven't heard a lot of people describe it that way. Most people are like, oh, you have to be passionate about your job. And it could be both things, right? I mean, you could also have the ego and be passionate. But I think a lot of people chase after these things, thinking they're chasing a labor of love or whatever. But I think what they're not understanding is that it's actually their ego driving it, and they're hoping to get something out of it.
Yeah, and you should be really careful about that, because the metric I like to use, and this is a funny one, is what percentage of the Harvard Business School graduating class goes into a certain industry. So there was a period in like 2008 that like 60% or 70% of the class went into investment banking. Well, shoot, like, that's an indication that industry is, destined to fail because they're overpaying. Too many people are going into it. Something's weird. There was a period where every HBS grad, and we're kind of still in it, but getting out of it a little bit, was starting a new company. Like in 2020 to 2022, every HBS grad had an idea, was raising money, and you're like, oh my God, this is bad. Because they all thought that that's what you were supposed to do. And were they doing it for the right reasons? No, some of them were, sure. But the fact that such a huge percentage of the class was going and doing is a bad indication. Another way of thinking about this
thing too. Sorry to cut you off.
The famous expression, like, when everyone is greedy, be scared, and when everyone's scared, be greedy. Like, you kind of want to be going against the grain in these things a little bit. Like, so when there are too many people doing it for the wrong reasons, it's really going to create bad outcomes for everybody.
Yeah, and it's an interesting observation too, because I was asked kindly not to come to Harvard. They asked me to just leave campus immediately and stop talking to me. But I wonder if part of, what I've heard is some of the value of going to a school like that, an Ivy League school. I have a 17-year-old right now that's applied at several of them. We'll see if that shakes out for him. But one of the values that I've heard is that it's really about the networking, right? You meet other people who are in Harvard business, and they have parents who went to Harvard and whatever. So it ends up being a really good networking channel. And so I'm wondering if that networking is actually a double-edged sword, which is, one, yes, you get connected, but two, maybe you end up everybody in one heap, kind of like you're describing, where you're all going into finance or you're all starting businesses, but it's by virtue of who you're networking with. You're starting to talk to other founders, you're starting to do all these things.
Yeah, for sure. There are disadvantages. Like, at the Ivy League schools, they have very good career programs, but the career programs are basically, you should either be an investment banker, or you should be a consultant, or maybe there's like entrepreneur. And those are the 3 categories. And you don't realize until much later that actually there's 500 different jobs you could be doing, and they just never introduce you. So for sure, there's risks to being sort of in a place where it points you in the wrong direction. But yeah, I'm not saying that everybody goes into for ego. I'm just saying, be careful, make sure you're going into for the right reasons.
Yeah. Let's talk about the early days of Regal. You're working for Angie's List. You decide that there's a better solution. You want to tackle it. What's the MVP?
So we truly left. Like, we told our boss, like, we love you. Like, we'll spend 6 more months here helping you, and then we're out. So we like left, and then spent a couple months really, like I said, digging into, like, do we believe that we're right? Like, can we prove to ourselves that we're right? And how do we do that very cheaply? So the MVP wasn't even build a product. The MVP was, I like built a deck with some slides and like mock-ups, and I would take it to people and like who I thought could be customers and explain to them this idea and see what they reacted. And basically what I learned, the barometer is like, one, you don't want to be going to your friends because they're never going to tell you the truth. You want to be going at least 1 degree removed from your friend or somebody you've never met. So that's like, that person's going to be more honest with you. And 2, are they literally reaching across the table and saying, I need that tomorrow? So of the 8 things you showed them that you think you're going to do, if you're lucky, you have 1 where people are reaching across the table saying, do that. And now you have a business. If people are not doing that, you don't have a business. Like, if they're not immediately asking to give you money, rethink what you're doing. You're wasting your time. And what's also funny is, like, we said we were going to do 8 things. It took us 4 years to get to the point where we were doing all those 8. So for 4 years, we were kind of doing the 1, 2, 3 of them. So it takes much longer than you think to do all the things you want. Once we got to a place where we were convinced, we did go and raise some money. We did go and build a product. And we built it very iteratively. So a lot of companies spend the first year building technology before they would show it to a customer, right? We instead really actually ourselves, we're building like the thinnest possible version of the product, using as much existing stuff as possible to get it in customers' hands to see their feedback before we did the next thing. So I'll give you like a crazy example. Like, we had a piece of the product where we didn't want to build the thing. So we put screenshots in the product of what we thought it would look like. And like, people would basically go to it, see it, and kind of react to it. And then depending on what their feedback was, we'd build different features of that part of the product first. So literally it was a screenshot in the product at the beginning, because like, we didn't want to build it. And eventually we did build it, but it was much smarter. The way we built it was much smarter because we knew which of the features people wanted. They'd be going, oh yeah, why can't I click on this one button? When everyone was telling us that was the thing they wanted, we knew that was the piece of the product to build first. So yeah, you have to be very iterative about it. I think, the other thing that's really dangerous early is, not really listening to customers. So, you have an opinion as a founder, you're sort of continuing to say something, and you're not really listening to what the customers are saying back, and it gets you into trouble. So like, the best founders I've seen, I'm guilty of not listening to, are ones that get in there and really ask the hard questions. Okay, you said you wanted this, what is it going to replace? Okay, where's the budget going to come from? How are you going to do this in addition to your other priorities? Why did you even decide that, because you kind of fear that at the beginning, because somebody said, yes, I want to take their money and start doing this. No. Especially at the beginning, like, stop and ask the 5 hard questions so you make sure you really understand what's going on, so that, you're not setting yourself up for failure in 2 months when you realize, oh shoot, they like didn't really need the thing I was selling, and now it's all going to fall apart after 2 months of hard work.
Yeah.
So can we get into, I mean, if you're open to it, get into the fundraising process a little bit?
Yeah.
A lot of different ways of raising money for companies, some, strategic, some smarter than others, things like that. So I wonder if you talk about, first of all, what you guys thought you were going to do, and maybe what you ended up doing and why it was the right choice for you guys.
Yeah, very misunderstood process. Like I said, a lot of people just look at it and go, oh, yeah, of course fundraising is good. Well, no. For most businesses, fundraising is bad. Fundraising is specifically raising money from venture capitalists, is for businesses where there's a very high cost upfront to get the business started, but over time your margins are very good, and as you scale up, that all that sort of money from your profit can basically pay back your investors. If you're not in a business model where there's a high upfront cost and then high margins in the future, do not raise VC money, because you're just going to be in a bad position. Software businesses are classically like that, right? You're spending a lot of money upfront to build software, build, sort of some customers. But once you've built it, you can have all that margin, all those sort of that profit pay you back over time, right? So be very careful that you're in the right kind of business for raising VC money. there are a lot of businesses where you should self-fund or where you should raise, a little bit of debt from the local bank because that's a better model for that kind of business. What's an example? Like a restaurant, you should never raise VC money. I mean, never, but you shouldn't raise VC money for a restaurant. It's probably unlikely to be the right model. If you are in a model that is VC backable, the way you raise is really not that complicated. To some extent, think of it as, herding sheep, maybe, if you want to be insulting. And I don't mean to be insulting to our investors, but to some extent, you need to keep all the people that you want to raise money from together to make sure that you're managing the process. Otherwise the sheep go everywhere. So to take it in a little bit more detail, first thing first, understand who's actually interested in your space. There's lots of stuff out there. Don't just go randomly pitching people. The number one mistake founders make is they go pitch 1,000 people, and 99% of them were never going to even be interested in you. If you're finding yourself having to convince them of your thesis, it's the wrong investor, by and large. Mm-hmm. They're never going to invest. You want to find the people who already believe in your thesis. They're just asking themselves, do I want to invest in this team? Right? That's what you want, not trying to convince, everyone sort of hears these like stories of someone like pitching and convincing somebody. Most of the time, the right investor already believes in the thing you're doing. They just are wondering, are you the right team to do it? So find the right people. Ideally get a warm introduction. Like don't go and randomly cold email them if you can get a warm introduction. But if you can't, be respectful with a cold introduction. Be funny. I read, I'm also an investor on the side. Like I read all those emails, but if it's nonsense or it's clearly the same thing you copied and pasted, I don't read it. I believe it. But if you say, hey, Alex, I see X and I really want your help in this thing. And we're raising money and here's why I think I want to, you'd be right. I'm going to read it. I'm going to respond to you. So you can do cold. When you are going through the process, then you've got some people interested. What you want to do is keep everybody in the same step. By and large, VCs have 4 steps. They'll do a first call. They'll do a second call where they're asking deeper questions. So the first call is really your pitch. The second call is deeper questions. They'll then do sort of more diligence. They'll have a third call to go over the diligence, and then there's usually a partner meeting. So basically, those are the 4 steps that everyone goes through. The fastest that can go is kind of 2 weeks. The slowest it can go is like 2 months, kind of in between there. But you want to make sure all the VCs are in the same step. So if somebody tries to move much faster, either make sure everyone else is moving faster or slow down the person trying to move fast, because you want each VC at the same step at the same time. Otherwise, what happens is one falls out and everyone else knows it. It's a very small industry, and now you've lost a little bit of leverage. So what you're trying to do is keep everyone in the same step. And then when they get to the end, hopefully you get multiple people interested in investing, and we can talk about exactly what they're giving you, but it's called a term sheet. And then if you have multiple term sheets, you can leverage that into working with the best investor you want. Basically, you can say to the one you want, hey, I really want to work with you. The terms that matter to me are how much control I have on the board, how much money I raise, and what percentage of the company you own. So if you can match these terms, I'll work with you. And the person says yes, now you have a deal. If the person says no, well, maybe you don't get to work with your best investor and you have to go to somebody else, or you can choose to work with that investor for slightly worse terms. So that sort of process can be well run or badly run. But I hear horror stories about people pitching 1,000 investors. They're wasting their time. The trick is, as a founder, how do you do this really quickly, right? Because every minute you're spending pitching is a waste of time. You're not building your company. So don't go out and spend lots of time pitching. Don't go to pitch events once you have raised money. Don't talk to people that are never going to invest in you. Be really careful with your time. At that point, you've raised money. Probably you have some investors who are on your board. It's a whole different world. Now you've got to manage those investors. You've got to get ready for what the milestones are for your next fundraise. And if you're not going to be profitable or break even by the next fundraise, could do this all over again. It's if anything, gets harder, right? Because at the beginning, there are no metrics. You're pitching an idea, a team. Now, 12 months later, 18 months later, you have metrics, and you have to prove that the thing that you said you would do, you've done. So you have to be really smart about pre-planning that and figuring out how you're going to set expectations and beat those expectations to make sure the next round of investors are interested in investing.
Yeah, I think setting expectations is the critical part there, because you can claim you can do everything under the sun, but if you can't put results in front of the investors, you're not going to get a second check.
Yeah. And then, later stage, there are different types of deals. So later stage, people tend to use debt more, or they'll raise money from instead of venture capitalists, private equity, which have different expectations. So, you have to be very smart about sort of the type of investors you're working with.
So
Even in venture capital, if you really get into it, there are people that are seed specialists, that are Series A specialists, that are late stage specialists. So you have to be very smart about who you're pitching.
okay, so did you raise funds for Regal?
Yeah. So at this point, we've raised like $80 million.
Okay, so a lot. So you got the initial pitch, you got the initial investor behind you, you got the check. What do you do now?
Yeah. So it becomes real. Like I said, like once you get the check, you're sort of locked in for at least 2 years. You can always give the money back, and I can tell you stories like that with friends. But by and large, you're sort of locked in. That the investors want you to go and hit your head against the wall until you figure out that you sort of validate or don't validate the bet that you said you're going to take. But yeah, you have to, as a founder now, be very smart about prioritizing your time. Similar concept to what we were talking about before. What is it that you need to prove? And to some extent, as a founder in a VC-backed startup, you're trying to de-risk things constantly. So you have to ask yourself, what is the riskiest thing that I'm trying to prove? Well, my goal is to use satellites to sign the sun on the other side of the Earth. So, what I need to prove is that I can put a satellite in the air. Then what I need to prove is that I can make a mirror clear enough that the sun can shine. Then I need to prove that I can, do it 3 times in a row. But incrementally figure out what is the hardest thing you need to prove and go forward. So like in a SaaS business, it's often, hey, can you find the right customer? How long does it take them to buy the product? How do they use the product? Do they continue to use the product year over year? Do they use it more? Those are the types of things you're trying to prove. In a software business, it's very well understood what metrics you need to show versus in the example I was giving of a satellite trying to shine sun on the other side of the Earth on the nighttime side. That's less well understood. And so it's going to be harder to figure out what metrics you need to prove.
Yeah, so to that end, I wanted to talk about sort of ideation versus execution. And this maybe plays into the topic of, when a venture capitalist has come along, maybe they're looking to decide if you're the right team. And obviously, ideas are one thing and execution is another. I also want to kind of layer in there how ego is involved in here, which is where you believe maybe you can do more than you're capable of. So I wonder if you talk a little bit about just sort of the actual execution step of something like Regal. So in this case, you come up with a great idea, you vetted it, you've got people who buy it. Now you've got to go do it. So you talk a little bit about sort of the iterative process and things like that, but I wonder if you could get a little deeper on execution and maybe more broadly how people can be better executors in their own.
Sure. Yeah, I think my co-founder and I were lucky in this, in that like if you were to go background check us or whatever, reference check us, like we are executors by nature. Like that is our strong suit. Like we will go run through walls and get things done. It's not everyone's strong suit. So first of all, know it about yourself. Like, are you good at this or not? Like one way of asking it is like, if given the time, like, are you going to go and daydream or are you going to go and execute, and know it about yourself? Because, if you're a daydreamer, well, maybe you need to force yourself to create structures to execute. If you're an executor, maybe you need to force yourself to create structures to think bigger. So both ways can be bad. But, in this mode where, let's say, exactly what you're doing and you're in an execution mode, I think for us, like a couple things. One, like we were sitting side by side, like, at the beginning, but then COVID hit and like we literally weren't sitting side by side. And that was a whole like crazy thing where we're like, shit, we had this whole like idea that we'd be working together on this thing, and now we can't even do that. How are we going to do this? So like that was existential. But we got to the point where we had to find roles. So like I was more the one going out and talking with customers. My co-founder was more building the product, the initial product, and working with engineers to build the product. And we, check in multiple times a day on tech, Slack, on calls, on whatever. We make sure we stay very close. And, we were just like sort of very clear to what I said about which things we wanted to prove. So I wanted to prove I could get, X number of contracts for this dollar value from this many customers at the beginning. And then I wanted to prove we could implement them within X weeks. And then I wanted to prove that there was a metric that we were measuring, like, dollar revenue per customer, and that by using Regal, they could improve it. And each of those things, we set the goal, we went out and did it and saw what the result was. And then, continuously worked on sort of setting new goals. Eventually, to what we talked about, we started hiring people as it became too much work for us. First, on the engineering side, we hired people. Like I was the only go-to-market person until we were at 10, 11 people. And then at some point, we hired a go-to-market person to start helping me. But yeah, that like, we love that process. Like we had a great time during that phase where there's very little pressure because you haven't built anything yet. And you're kind of constantly learning and trying new things. And like you can iterate very quickly because there's very few people, there's no communication talks.
Yeah.
Let's actually talk about going to market. You've got your kind of product. Go live with it. Now all the headaches come in. Did you have any hurdles or things that came up when you went live?
Well, go to market or from a technical perspective?
Well, go to market, I guess.
Yeah. So a couple things. So we probably talked to 100 people before we even like built the product. And one of our original hypotheses was that companies that were not using their contact center to drive revenue would be good prospects. So imagine, the farmer's dog, which is largely a retailer. They have a contact center, but it's mostly for support. They're not doing much in their contact center to drive incremental revenue or retention.
Sure.
And we would, we went and pitched them and said, look, you want growth? Like one way to do growth is to drive more, proactive engagement from your contact center. Let's go do this. What we learned is the people who are not doing it yet, you have to first convince them that, they need to do it. Then you have to convince them Regal's the right product. And then they have to go and hire people to go and do the thing. So that was a much harder pitch versus when we went and worked with companies who had contact centers that already saw their role as doing more than just inbound support and were limited by their technology. That was a much easier sale because you didn't have to convince them to do it or hire the people. It was just switching the technology. So that was one very sort of interesting learning early. Another one was, particularly in larger customers, they were, signing 3-year contracts with these software providers and had spent $1 million implementing it. Like, even if their technology sucked and they hated, they did not want to change. Like their job was on the line. Like they knew the system. They were not going to change. So the number of, people weren't only interested in sort of the best. Whereas when we had been in marketing teams, basically marketing teams are happy to switch anytime there's a better product because like they constantly want the best. Contact centers are often satisfied to stick with something way subpar because they know that there's a massive switching cost. It's real. I'm not saying that they're making an irrational decisions.
I went to a rental car location at the airport about a month ago, and they were still using like a MS-DOS software because and literally the printer with the edges you have to tear off.
Oh, for sure.
and that just blew my mind. That was still the fact that they were still using it because
the cost is real, and so they haven't. Like, I'll give you an even further example. One of our bigger investors invested in a company. What they do is they go to very large institutions like banks, airlines, and they help them transition off of their oldest technology that was built on COBOL. So COBOL is a language that nobody programs in anymore, but was very popular 40 or 50 years ago. Often these big, like banks or big airlines literally don't have many engineers that even know the language. And then that's their core booking system. And if it goes down, the whole airline will be down for 2 days. And so part of this other company's pitch is they walk in and they help people understand what the software is and move it to a more modern infrastructure and maintain it so that they can get out of a position where they're stuck and beholden to this. So to some extent, like it's gotten so bad there that there's a business opportunity. Contact centers are kind of in between. Like it's bad. There are things people don't like about it, but it does enough of what they need, or if possible, do enough of what they need that they don't want to switch. And so my co-founder, one of her theories actually is that we do better when the person in charge of the contact center did not come from a contact center background because their mind is more open to new ideas. I think that there are plenty of contact center leaders that are actually very innovative and are just limited by their technology. So I don't think you have to be somebody who didn't come from contact center, but definitely it takes a desire to do things in a new way to want to do this. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in the old way of doing things. So, the early adopters are the ones you're looking for, and not every company is an early adopter. So anyway, that was a sort of very big learning. And then as we got into it, I think the other learning for us was there were, how to put it, like there's some things that we sold very quickly. And so, if I look back, we sold those very quickly and we actually didn't build up our marketing muscle because we could just sell certain things. And looking back, I wish we had invested earlier in a better marketing muscle because we'd be better off today. We actually waited for a long time to build it. We did very well, but now that we want the marketing muscle working, it's not working as well.
Yeah.
No, it's an interesting observation. In another life, or the same life, I guess, that's happening concurrently. I'm the CMO at a tech startup that's building software for real estate. And this is one of the things we're running into, which is everybody's on antiquated software, and the cost of moving over is just enormous. And so a lot of these companies are just letting it ride on their 20, 30-year-old piece of software. And so that's actually one of the bigger challenges for us as we're coming in. We see it too as an opportunity, but at the same time, it's going to be a commitment to make the move for a lot of people.
Yeah, like in our industry, for a I don't know, call it $100,000 contact center software deal, the average sales cycle is probably 12 months. So on that size deal, our average is probably 6 months. So we're doing something right. It's faster, but still, that is a slow sales process. And so that, that means that you have less opportunity to win, less opportunity to sort of learn from the process. So, to some extent, I think businesses where it's a slightly smaller dollar value and you can sell it more quickly, the learnings are faster, and that is a sort of more fun model. So it's it's one of the things I've learned as a founder. Like, you should really think about what kind, if you're going to be B2B, what kind of sale do you want? Do you want the $5,000 very quick sale, or do you want the $1 million slow sale? Both are fine. Both can be good businesses, but decide which one you're going to enjoy more.
Yeah, that's a good point. One last thing I kind of wanted to get into before we close up here is getting into shoot. I'm totally losing my question. I forgot it. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay, I remember. Now, if you're building Regal over again, and obviously you guys have gone through a lot of the process so far, and you're making good headway on the brand, and obviously raising money and everything against it. But if you can even give yourself sort of this outsider's view, is there anything you've done differently? You mentioned the marketing muscle being one example, but is there anything else maybe at its core that you wish you'd have done differently in the first place that might have put you somewhere else?
Yeah, definitely the marketing is a big piece. Like, I would have invested more in that earlier, or better in it earlier. I'd say the other thing is, early days, there were a lot of customers that came to us looking to buy some of our products, and we kind of said, yes, like, your dollars are green, yes. And okay, I think that was fine at the beginning because you're learning, but relatively quickly we figured out that certain of those customers weren't good customers for us. They were going to, take too much of our time. They were going to churn. They weren't going to really use the value that we were giving. And so we should stop taking those. So as an example, there were customers who wanted to buy our products who weren't contact centers. And at the beginning, we took their money. Well, that was silly. Or there were customers who were too small and they were never really going to be able to have an internal person running this. That was silly. So we should have more quickly stopped taking the wrong customer. And that's difficult because people, are coming with dollars wanting to pay you. You got to say no. And it would have slowed our growth, but it would have caused less problems because it meant we wouldn't have had to support them. It would have meant that, like, now those customers wouldn't churn, or sometimes we push them out, honestly. And so, like, we would have had now sort of an easier growth curve. So being diligent early, yes, at the beginning you want to try lots of people, but as soon as you know who the right segments of customers are to go after, lock that down. Be very clear which customers are going after. That was a mistake. And then I'd say in hiring, one of the mistakes we made is we didn't come from the SaaS world. So we hired too many people who came from SaaS, even if they didn't have the right cultural attributes. What I mean is, like, for a role that does X, we'd have one candidate who maybe was culturally better, but didn't know how to do the role. And then we know the person who'd done the role 4 times, who maybe wasn't culturally exactly right. And too many times we chose, once in a while you can choose the person who knows the background, but too many times we chose the person who knows the background. They come in and they go, oh, I know how to do this, leave me alone. And that's the antithesis of what you need. At an early stage company, you need people going, wow, like, I know how we used to do it, but, like, how can we do it here differently? Let's work, elbow to elbow, side by side to figure out exactly the best way to do this. So I think, like, that hiring mistake, like, cost us a lot of time because instead of learning, we were just doing the same thing 8 other companies had done before us, and that's not good enough. And so those are some of the bigger mistakes we've made.
That actually brings me to maybe another quick question is, so as it pertains to that, you mentioned that you guys didn't come from SaaS. When you go to hire people from SaaS, how did you make sure that you were actually capable of hiring them? Like, you didn't come from SaaS, you maybe didn't have the same background as them. How were you able to find people that could fill the void, and how did you recognize when they didn't?
So, we in SaaS, there are clearly defined roles for better or for worse. So if you stick to the clearly defined roles, it's not that hard to find them. I think to some extent, we've moved a little bit away from some of the traditional roles, which has been harder to then find people in SaaS. And like I said, when you're looking for people who maybe have the right attitudes, you need to go outside of SaaS and find people who don't have the experience and teach them how to do it. So now 4 years in, we kind of understand the mechanics and I can explain it to somebody. So I don't really feel a need to hire somebody who's done SaaS before. At the beginning where we didn't know certain mechanics, we felt a need to bring somebody on who could help us understand that. But, it wasn't that hard. I'd say New York was difficult. So we always wanted to be New York based. That's where we're from. That's where we wanted to build a company. There's just not as many companies that have reached 100 million in ARR in New York. So very quickly we passed, $10 million in ARR. And so if you want to hire somebody for $1 million in ARR SaaS, sure, whatever. There's lots of people who've seen that. But in New York, there are not that many people who have seen past 10 million in ARR for SaaS. And so you're interviewing all these people, and like in San Francisco, like you're like, wow, there's so many people you can interview. In New York, there's like one, and you're like, shit, that shrinks my pool enormously. So I think it'll obviously get better and better in New York, and it is, even in the 4 years we've sort of been doing this, but that does make it tougher if there just haven't been people that have seen that story. Like in consumer, in New York, people have seen that story. They know what it's like. There's a lot of talent. In SaaS, it just isn't there.
Yeah. Well, Alex, thank you so much for making time for us today. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation. Can you tell people where they can reach out to find more about you if they want to find more about Regal?
Yeah, especially, if you're in like insurance, healthcare, education, a more considered industry, you're running a contact center, would always love to chat. Go to regal.io or email me at hello@regal.io.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to do this, Alex. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.